In the quiet town of Silver Creek, where maple trees lined the sidewalks and everyone knew each other by name, 9-year-old Lucas Carter was the kind of child who made adults smile with his infectious enthusiasm. His laughter echoed through the neighborhood as he pedaled his red Schwinn bicycle, the playing cards clipped to the spokes announcing his arrival long before he turned the corner. That ordinary Tuesday afternoon in September 1998, Lucas waved goodbye to his mother and rode off into the golden autumn light. He never returned home. 21 years of silence followed, until the day a Wall Street Journal cover story revealed that one of America's most brilliant financial minds had a secret past that would stun the nation. This is the extraordinary story of a disappearance that defied explanation and a return that defied all odds. If you enjoy stories of mystery and human resilience, make sure to subscribe and join our community of mystery lovers. The morning air in Silver Creek carried the scent of freshly cut grass and Mrs. Peterson's cinnamon rolls from 3 houses down. Lucas Carter sat at the breakfast table, his legs swinging beneath his chair, too short to reach the floor. His mother, Anna, placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, ruffling his curly black hair as she passed. "Eat up, baby. You'll need your energy for school today," she said, her voice warm like honey in tea. Lucas shoveled the eggs into his mouth, his mind already racing with plans for after school. "Mom, can I go biking with Max after homework? I found this cool new trail behind the old Johnson property." Anna glanced at her husband David, who was nursing his coffee while reviewing bills at the table. Their eyes met briefly in that silent communication that parents perfect, a mixture of concern and the desire to let their child explore. "Just be home before dark," David finally said, his deep voice carrying the weight of a man who worked 60-hour weeks at the local factory. "And stay away from the creek. It rained last night." Lucas nodded eagerly, already calculating how much time he'd have after school to explore. His father reached across the table and squeezed his son's shoulder. "One day, those curious eyes of yours are gonna discover something important, son." "Like buried treasure?" Lucas asked, his brown eyes widening. "Better," David replied with a rare smile. "Answers to questions nobody's even thought to ask yet." The Carter home was modest, a 3-bedroom ranch house with faded blue siding and a small yard where Max, their chocolate Labrador, lazily patrolled the perimeter. What it lacked in luxury, it made up for warmth. Family photos crowded the walls, science fair ribbons hung proudly on the refrigerator, and the living room bookshelf held Lucas's growing collection of encyclopedias, bought 1 volume at a time from yard sales and discount stores. When Lucas wasn't exploring on his bike, he was taking things apart to see how they worked. The broken kitchen radio now functioned better than when they'd bought it. The neighbor's discarded alarm clock found new life under his small, determined fingers. Anna often joked that they needed to hide their appliances when Lucas got that particular gleam in his eye. "I'm going to build robots one day," Lucas announced that morning, as he did at least once a week. "Or maybe bridges, big ones, like the Golden Gate." "Engineers make good money," David nodded approvingly. "But first, school. Go brush your teeth, or you'll miss the bus." Lucas hurried upstairs, his footsteps thundering across the ceiling, as Anna poured herself a second cup of coffee. "That boy has more energy than the sun," she said, leaning against the counter. The early morning light caught the fatigue in her eyes, the result of working night shifts at the local hospital as a nurse's aide. David folded the unpaid electric bill and tucked it into his pocket. "He's smart, Anna, smarter than both of us."
"He's going places." "I know," she said softly. "That's what worries me sometimes." The school bus honked outside, and Lucas came barreling down the stairs, backpack half-zipped and shoelaces untied. Anna knelt to quickly tie them as he bounced impatiently. "Be good, learn something amazing," she said, their morning ritual. "Love you, Mom." And he was gone, the screen door slamming behind him. Neither Anna nor David knew that this ordinary morning would be the last normal moment of their lives for more than 2 decades. At Silverwood Elementary, Lucas was known for 2 things: his questions that sometimes stumped teachers, and his kindness toward children others overlooked. That Tuesday, he sat next to Ellie Ramirez at lunch, a new girl who barely spoke English and ate alone most days. "Want to see something cool?" Lucas asked her, pulling a small compass from his pocket. He demonstrated how it always pointed north, no matter which way they turned. Ellie's shy smile was his reward. Mrs. Winters, his science teacher, stopped by their table. "Teaching again, Mr. Carter?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Just showing Ellie about magnetic fields," he replied, the words coming out with the slight whistle from his missing front tooth. "You know, Lucas, when you grow up, you might make a wonderful teacher." He shook his head firmly. "Engineers build things. That's what I want to do." The school day passed in a blur of multiplication tables and a spelling test where Lucas got 19 out of 20 words right. He'd always struggle with necessary. When the final bell rang, he raced to the bike rack where his red Schwinn waited faithfully. The afternoon was perfect for exploration. Crisp air, golden sunlight filtering through trees just beginning to turn amber and crimson. Lucas pedaled home first, as promised, to drop off his backpack and check in with his mom. Anna was napping before her night shift, so Lucas scribbled a note in his childish handwriting. "Gone biking with Max, back before dark. Love, Lucas." He whistled for Max, who bounded from the backyard, tail wagging in anticipation of adventure. They set off together, boy and dog, down Maple Street, past the corner store where Mr. Gunderson sometimes gave Lucas penny candy for helping stock shelves, past the library where Mrs. Wilson had set aside astronomy books she thought he'd enjoy, and toward the edge of town where houses gave way to open fields and scattered woods. "Come on, Max," Lucas called, standing on his pedals to gain speed down a gentle hill. The Labrador loped alongside, tongue lolling happily. The new trail, Lucas had discovered, was barely visible, just a narrow dirt path winding behind the abandoned Johnson property, through a stand of birch trees, and toward the creek that divided Silver Creek town from the neighboring farmland. In spring, the creek rushed with snowmelt from the distant mountains, but by September it was typically a gentle stream a child could wade across. Lucas leaned his bike against a birch tree and pulled his prized possession from his pocket, a small notebook filled with his scientific observations. He'd been mapping the area, noting interesting rocks, unusual plants, and the best climbing trees. Today, he wanted to examine the creek bed for fossils he'd read about in the library books. Max wandered nearby, sniffing at rabbit trails and occasionally looking up to check on his young master. The afternoon sun dappled the ground through the trees, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was peaceful, the kind of moment childhood memories are made of. What happened next remains the central mystery that would haunt Silver Creek for decades. At 6:42 p.m., David Carter arrived home from his shift at the factory to find Anna awake and preparing for work. "Is Lucas in his room?" he asked, washing grease from his hands at the kitchen sink. "I thought he was with you," Anna replied, looking up from packing her lunch.
"Didn't you pick him up on your way home?" A cold weight settled in David's stomach. He should have been home before dark. That was the deal. The sun had set 20 minutes earlier, and the September twilight was quickly fading to darkness. David stepped onto the back porch and called Lucas's name. Only crickets answered. Anna found the note by the telephone. "Gone biking with Max, back before dark." Max isn't here either, David realized, whistling for the dog. No answering bark came. They tried not to panic. Perhaps he'd lost track of time. Maybe he'd stopped at a friend's house. Anna called the neighbors while David drove the streets of their small town, calling his son's name out the window of his pickup truck. By 8:30 p.m., with no sign of Lucas, they called the police. Officer Jim Rankin arrived within minutes. He'd coached Lucas's t-ball team the previous summer and knew the boy wasn't prone to wandering off. "When did you last see him?" Rankin asked, notebook in hand. "This morning, getting on the school bus," Anna said, her voice tight with fear. "But his teacher confirmed he was in class all day." And the dog is missing too? That's good. Max wouldn't leave his side, Rankin offered reassuringly, though his eyes betrayed his concern. Within the hour, Silver Creek's small police force was mobilized. Neighbors formed search parties, flashlights cutting through the darkness as they combed the streets, calling Lucas's name. The local volunteer fire department joined the effort, bringing more powerful lights and radios to coordinate the search. David drove to every friend's house, every park, every place a 9-year-old boy might lose track of time. Anna stayed home, trembling by the phone, praying for it to ring with good news. At 11:23 p.m., the first discovery was made. Lucas's red Schwinn bicycle was found leaning against a birch tree near the edge of Johnson's abandoned property. The playing cards were still attached to the spokes. His notebook lay open on a nearby rock, the last entry unfinished. Creek rocks have shiny parts, could be gold, or maybe just. But there was no sign of Lucas or Max. The creek was immediately searched, fears of drowning foremost in everyone's mind, despite the water being barely knee-deep in most places. The volunteer fire department waded through every inch of the waterway for a mile in each direction. Nothing. As midnight passed, the search expanded. State police were called in. By morning, when Lucas had been missing for over 12 hours, the FBI arrived. Standard procedure for a missing child case. Special Agent Catherine Reeves took charge, setting up a command center in Silver Creek's small town hall. The first 48 hours are critical, she told the exhausted parents. We're bringing in dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging, and more agents. The search dogs picked up Lucas's scent from his bicycle to the creek's edge, but then lost it completely, as if the boy had vanished into thin air. One theory was that he might have been carried downstream, but the creek was thoroughly searched for miles, including with underwater equipment. As the search entered its second day, media vans began arriving. Lucas Carter's face appeared on regional news, then national. America watched as Anna Carter, dark circles under her eyes, pleaded for her son's return. Lucas, baby, if you can hear this, we love you. We miss you. Please come home. Her voice broke as David's arm tightened around her shoulders. Days turned into a week. The search area expanded to a 20-mile radius. Volunteers from neighboring states arrived to help. Lucas's school picture, showing a gap-toothed smile and bright, intelligent eyes, became one of the most recognized images in America that autumn. And then, on the 8th day, another discovery. Max, the chocolate Labrador, was found wandering along the highway 15 miles from Silver Creek. The dog was dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. No collar.
No sign of Lucas. Veterinarians examined Max thoroughly, looking for evidence, hair, fibers, anything that might provide a clue. They found nothing except burrs in his fur and traces of mud that matched the creek bed. Hope both surged and dimmed with this discovery. Max's return suggested Lucas might still be alive somewhere, but the distance the dog had traveled opened troubling new questions. How had the dog gotten so far away? And why wasn't Lucas with him? As weeks passed, the search gradually scaled back. The FBI's mobile command center departed, though Agent Reeves promised the case would remain active. The media moved on to newer stories. The volunteers returned to their lives, though many continued searching on weekends. For Anna and David Carter, time became measured differently, before and after Lucas disappeared. Their home, once filled with a child's laughter and endless questions, fell silent, except for the persistent ringing of the telephone with false leads and the occasional reporter seeking an update. Anna took a leave of absence from the hospital. David worked double shifts, partly to cover the mounting bills from the search efforts, and partly to exhaust himself enough to sleep at night. Their marriage, once solid, began to crack under the weight of unspoken accusations and different grieving styles. "You should have picked him up after work," Anna said during one particularly bitter argument 3 months after Lucas vanished. "And you should have been awake instead of napping," David countered, immediately regretting the words. They both knew these recriminations were pointless. Neither was to blame, yet both carried the crushing weight of parental guilt, the primal failure to protect their child. 6 months after the disappearance, the first psychics and self-proclaimed clairvoyants began contacting the Carters, offering visions and communications with Lucas. Desperate for any connection, Anna initially welcomed them, while David dismissed them as vultures preying on grief. "He's near water," one claimed. "I see mountains." "He's with a man who collects things," said another. "Old things, valuable things." None of these vague pronouncements led anywhere, but they kept hope flickering like a candle in a draught, never quite extinguished, but growing fainter. On the 1-year anniversary of Lucas's disappearance, Silver Creek held a candlelight vigil. The entire town gathered in the park where Lucas had once played t-ball. Anna and David stood together, hollow-eyed, but still searching the crowd, as if expecting to see their son walk up at any moment. Officer Rankin, now promoted to chief of police, renewed his promise. "We haven't forgotten. We won't stop looking." But as years passed, the active investigation inevitably cooled. Lucas's case file grew thick with dead-end leads and inconclusive evidence. His age-progressed photos were periodically released to the media. Lucas at 11, Lucas at 13, Lucas at 16. A ghost growing up in the digital realm while his real fate remained unknown. The Carters eventually separated, though neither remarried. Anna moved to an apartment near the hospital and returned to work, channeling her grief into caring for others. David stayed in the house, unable to leave the place where Lucas might one day return. He kept his son's room exactly as it had been. Model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, space posters on the walls, books neatly arranged on shelves. Max lived to the age of 15, spending his final years divided between Anna's apartment and David's house, as if the loyal dog was still trying to keep the family connected. When he finally passed, they buried him in the backyard, under Lucas's favorite climbing tree, both parents privately acknowledging it was like losing their last link to their son. Life in Silver Creek gradually returned to normal, though normal now included the cautionary tale of Lucas Carter.
Parents became more protective. Children were no longer allowed to roam freely, and the woods behind the Johnson property were avoided, as if haunted. The mystery of what happened on that September afternoon became part of local lore, whispered about, but never solved. Some believed Lucas had been abducted by a passing stranger. Others speculated he'd fallen into an abandoned well or mine shaft that searchers had missed. A few even suggested he might have run away, though no one who knew the happy, curious 9-year-old believed he would leave voluntarily. As the years stretched into decades, the case of Lucas Carter became one of America's enduring mysteries, mentioned in true crime books and occasionally featured on television specials about unsolved disappearances. But for Anna and David, it wasn't a fascinating mystery. It was the ongoing tragedy that defined their lives. And then, 21 years after Lucas vanished without a trace, the impossible happened. The first hint came on a cold January morning in 2019. Mark Stevens, a private investigator who specialized in cold cases, was reviewing the Carter file. Stevens had never worked the original case, but had become fascinated with it after moving to Silver Creek 3 years earlier. With permission from both the local police and the Carters, he'd been methodically reviewing every piece of evidence, every statement, every photograph. That morning, he was examining photos taken at the Silver Creek Harvest Festival just 2 weeks before Lucas disappeared. The festival had been thoroughly investigated at the time, with agents questioning every vendor and examining all photos for suspicious individuals who might have noticed Lucas. But Stevens was looking at something different. The backgrounds of the photos, the incidental details others might have missed. In one image, taken near the apple bobbing station, he noticed Lucas standing at the edge of the frame.
The boy was watching the competition, his expression animated. But what caught Stephen's attention was the man standing several feet behind Lucas, partially obscured by other festival-goers. The man's face wasn't clearly visible, but something about his posture, the way he seemed to watch the boy rather than the festivities, raised Stephen's instincts. Using modern photo enhancement techniques unavailable during the original investigation, Stevens managed to clarify the image slightly. The man appeared to be in his 40s, well dressed in what looked like an expensive coat. He was holding something in his hand, possibly a business card or small notepad. But most importantly, Lucas seemed aware of him. In the photo, the boy's head was slightly turned, his eyes appearing to meet the man's gaze. It might have been nothing, a random moment captured in time, but to Stevens, it felt significant. He immediately brought the enhanced photo to Chief Rankin, now nearing retirement after 3 decades with the Silver Creek Police Department. "I don't remember seeing this particular angle before," Rankin admitted, studying the image. "But we interviewed everyone at the festival. If this man had approached Lucas, someone would have noticed." "Maybe he didn't approach him that day," Stevens suggested. "Maybe this was just reconnaissance." The photo was sent to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit for review. Their assessment was cautious but intriguing. Subject displays interest in the child rather than the event. Positioning suggests possible surveillance rather than casual observation. Recommend identifying subject for questioning. But identifying a partially visible man from a 21-year-old photograph proved challenging. Stevens began the painstaking process of tracking down other attendees from the festival, hoping someone might remember the well-dressed stranger. Meanwhile, he continued his methodical review of the case. Something had always bothered investigators about the location where Lucas's bicycle was found. The Johnson property was not on a direct route from school to the Carter home, nor was it a place Lucas was known to frequent regularly. Why had he gone there that particular day? Stevens obtained permission to search the now dilapidated Johnson house again. The property had been abandoned for nearly 30 years, the former owner having died without heirs. It had been thoroughly searched during the initial investigation, but Stevens believed modern technology might reveal something previously missed. With a team of volunteers and ground-penetrating radar, Stevens spent a weekend examining every inch of the property. They found nothing new inside the house or in the immediate yard, but when they extended the search to an old shed nearly hidden by overgrowth at the far edge of the property, something unusual appeared on the radar. "There's a space under the floor," the technician said, pointing to the anomaly on his screen. "Could be just an old root cellar, but it's not on any of the property plans." The shed's wooden floor was rotting in places, making it relatively easy to pull up the boards. Beneath, as predicted, was a small cellar, essentially a hole dug into the earth with rough wooden supports. It had clearly not been accessed in many years, with spiderwebs filling the space. At first, it seemed to be another dead end, but as Stevens carefully examined the space with a powerful flashlight, he noticed something glinting in the corner. Reaching carefully through the decades of dust and debris, he retrieved a small object. It was a child's bracelet, a simple woven band of red and blue threads, the kind elementary school children often make in art class. Attached to it was a small metal charm in the shape of a compass. Stevens' heart raced as he carefully bagged the item. He remembered from the case files that Lucas had been fascinated by navigation and maps. Could this be his? And if so, how had it ended up hidden beneath the floor of an abandoned shed? The bracelet was quickly shown to Anna Carter, who collapsed into tears upon seeing it. "I made this with him," she whispered, her fingers hovering over the evidence bag. "For his birthday that summer. He loved that little compass charm, said it would help him always find his way home." DNA testing confirmed what Anna already knew. Microscopic skin cells preserved in the woven fibers matched Lucas's DNA profile, which had been kept on file since his disappearance. This discovery electrified the investigation. The shed was completely dismantled and the area excavated, but no further evidence was found. However, the bracelet's presence raised profound questions. Had Lucas been held there at some point? Had he left it as a deliberate clue? Or had someone else placed it there after taking the boy? As the investigation intensified, Stevens made another discovery that would prove even more significant. While examining records of property transactions in the area around the time of Lucas's disappearance, he noticed something unusual. The Johnson property, long thought to have been simply abandoned after the owner's death, had actually been purchased just 3 months after Lucas vanished. The buyer was a corporate entity called Meridian Holdings, LLC, which had paid cash for the property but never developed it. Tracing Meridian Holdings proved difficult. It was registered in Delaware, with layers of corporate veils protecting the identity of its actual owner. This could be completely unrelated, Chief Rankin cautioned when Stevens presented his findings. Lots of investment companies buy properties and sit on them. True, Stevens acknowledged, but why this property? And why right after Lucas disappeared? With assistance from FBI financial specialists, Stevens began the complex process of unraveling Meridian Holdings' corporate structure. The investigation led through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, suggesting someone had gone to considerable lengths to obscure ownership. After weeks of legal maneuvers and subpoenas, they finally identified the principal behind Meridian Holdings, a financial services company called Blake Investments, headquartered in New York City. Blake Investments was a highly respected firm on Wall Street, known for its innovative approach to emerging markets and technology investments. Founded 15 years earlier, it had grown from a boutique operation to a significant player in the financial world, with billions under management. The founder and CEO was Ethan Blake, a financial wonderkind who had emerged seemingly from nowhere to become one of Wall Street's most enigmatic and successful figures. At an estimated age of 30, Blake was unusually young for his position and notably private, rarely giving interviews and never appearing on the financial news shows where many of his peers sought the spotlight. Stevens found this connection puzzling but potentially significant. Why would a high-powered Wall Street investment firm have purchased an abandoned property in Silver Creek, Colorado, shortly after a child disappeared nearby? And why go to such lengths to hide the ownership? He attempted to arrange an interview with Ethan Blake, but was repeatedly rebuffed by the company's legal team, who claimed their client was traveling internationally. Undeterred, Stevens began researching Blake himself, looking for any connection to Silver Creek or the Carter case. What he found, or rather what he didn't find, was striking. Despite Blake's prominence in financial circles, there was remarkably little public information about his background. No childhood photos, no hometown mentions in profiles, no college yearbook images. It was as if Ethan Blake had materialized fully formed on Wall Street in his early 20s. The few available photos showed a distinguished African-American man with an intense gaze, always impeccably dressed in custom suits, often photographed at charity galas or industry events. But invariably, these were controlled settings, never casual snapshots or unguarded moments. Stevens's instincts told him this unusual level of privacy might be significant. He contacted a facial recognition expert who specialized in age progression technology, the same technology used to create the updated images of missing children as they would appear years later. "I need you to do something unconventional," Stevens explained. "Instead of progressing a child's photo to show them as an adult, I want you to take this adult and see if you can create an image of what he might have looked like as a child." The expert was intrigued by the challenge. Using the limited photos available of Ethan Blake, she worked backward, removing the signs of maturity, adjusting facial proportions to match typical childhood development patterns. When Stevens received the results, his hands trembled as he opened the file.
The resemblance was striking. The computer-generated image of a young Ethan Blake bore an uncanny similarity to Lucas Carter. The same expressive eyes, the same distinctive shape to the ears. Even allowing for the significant margin of error in such reverse aging, the similarities were too profound to coincidence. Stevens immediately brought his findings to the FBI. Agent Reeves, now the assistant director of the Bureau's Criminal Investigative Division, personally reviewed the case. "This is compelling," she acknowledged, "but far from conclusive. We need more than a facial resemblance and a property connection. What they needed was DNA, a direct comparison between Lucas Carter's profile, still in the federal database, and Ethan Blake. But obtaining such a sample without Blake's cooperation would be legally problematic at best, potentially case-destroying at worst."
As the investigation reached this critical impasse, fate intervened in an unexpected way. The Financial Times announced that Ethan Blake would be giving a rare public lecture at Columbia University's Business School on the future of algorithmic trading. It would be one of his few appearances outside the controlled environment of his company. Stevens flew to New York, determined to make contact with Blake directly. The lecture hall was packed with students, faculty, and financial journalists. Blake arrived precisely on time, flanked by security personnel who cleared a path through the crowd. He moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to command, his tailored suit and subtle platinum watch suggesting success without ostentation. His lecture was brilliant, technical yet accessible, revealing a mind that could process complex systems with remarkable clarity. Stevens, seated near the back, studied Blake intently. There was something in his mannerisms, the way he used his hands when making an important point, that seemed hauntingly familiar from the videos of Lucas that the Carters had shared. When the lecture concluded, Blake took a few questions from the audience. Stevens raised his hand and was recognized. "Mr. Blake, your firm recently established a scholarship fund for foster children pursuing careers in finance. Was there a personal motivation behind that particular focus?" The question was carefully crafted, innocent on the surface, but probing Blake's background in a way that might elicit a revealing response. Blake paused, his expression momentarily shifting from polished confidence to something more complex. "Let's just say I understand the challenges of finding your way without advantages others take for granted," he replied smoothly. "Next question, please." It wasn't much, but to Stevens, the brief flicker in Blake's eyes confirmed his suspicions. As the event concluded, Stevens attempted to approach the podium, but Blake's security team efficiently escorted their client out a side door. Undeterred, Stevens followed at a distance. Outside the building, he watched as Blake entered a waiting black Suburban with tinted windows. Making a split-second decision, Stevens approached just as the financial mogul was about to step inside. "Mr. Blake," he called, "Mark Stevens, private investigator. I'd like to talk to you about Silver Creek, Colorado." Blake froze, 1 foot inside the vehicle. Without turning, he asked, "What agency are you with?" "I'm independent," Stevens replied, "working for a family that's been waiting 21 years for answers." For several seconds, Blake remained motionless. Then, surprising both Stevens and his own security team, he turned. "Get in," he said simply, gesturing to the Suburban. The vehicle took them to a private club in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of exclusive establishment where privacy was guaranteed and interruptions unthinkable. In a secluded alcove, with his security team maintaining a discreet distance, Ethan Blake finally spoke. "You believe I'm connected to Lucas Carter," he said. It wasn't a question. Stevens nodded. "I believe you might be Lucas Carter." Blake's expression remained unreadable. Based on what evidence? Stevens outlined his investigation, the property purchase, the bracelet, the facial recognition analysis. Blake listened without interruption, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Interesting theory," he said when Stevens finished. "Creative even, but ultimately circumstantial." "There's an easy way to confirm or refute it," Stevens countered. "A DNA test would settle the matter definitively." "And if I refuse?" Then the investigation continues. The FBI is already involved. The media will eventually get wind of it. Your privacy, which you clearly value, will be compromised regardless of the outcome. Blake was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant.
"You have no idea what you're disturbing," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to bring closure to parents who've spent 2 decades wondering if their child is dead or alive," Stevens replied. "Whatever the truth is, they deserve to know it." Blake's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Anna and David, are they well?" The question, with its implied familiarity, was the first real confirmation of Stevens' theory. "They've survived," he answered carefully, "but not without scars." Blake nodded, as if this was the answer he expected. "I'll consider your request," he said, rising to indicate the conversation was over. "My attorney will contact you tomorrow." True to his word, Blake's attorney called Stevens the following morning. To the investigator's surprise, Blake had agreed to a DNA test, with the condition that it be conducted privately by an independent laboratory with impeccable credentials. The results, delivered 3 days later, confirmed what Stevens had suspected. Ethan Blake and Lucas Carter were the same person. The DNA was a perfect match to the samples preserved in the evidence files for 21 years. The revelation sent shockwaves through multiple worlds. In Silver Creek, the news that Lucas was alive, and not just alive, but transformed into a financial powerhouse, was met with disbelief, joy, and profound questions. On Wall Street, the discovery that the enigmatic Ethan Blake had a hidden past created a momentary panic in the markets, with Blake investment stock dropping sharply before stabilizing. For Anna and David Carter, the news was delivered personally by Stevens and Agent Reeves. Anna collapsed into sobs upon hearing that her son was alive, while David stood motionless, as if afraid any movement might shatter this miracle. "How?" Anna finally managed to ask through her tears. "How is this possible?" The full story would emerge in the coming days, as Ethan Blake, once Lucas Carter, finally revealed the extraordinary journey that had transformed a missing 9-year-old from Silver Creek into one of Wall Street's most brilliant minds. Blake requested that the initial reunion with his parents take place privately, away from media scrutiny. A neutral location was chosen, a secluded mountain lodge 2 hours from Silver Creek. Stevens arranged the logistics, while Agent Reeves ensured security and privacy. On a snowy February morning, a helicopter landed at the lodge. Ethan Blake emerged, his tall figure silhouetted against the white landscape. He stood for a moment, adjusting his camel hair coat, before walking toward the entrance with the measured pace of someone approaching a moment they had both longed for and dreaded. Inside, Anna and David waited, barely breathing. When the door opened and their son, now a man, stepped into the room, time seemed to collapse. In his refined features, they could still see echoes of the boy who had pedaled away on a September afternoon 21 years earlier. "Lucas," Anna whispered, rising unsteadily. "Mom," he replied, his composed Wall Street demeanor cracking slightly. "Dad?" The reunion was both awkward and profound. 3 people connected by blood, but separated by experiences so divergent they struggled to find common ground. They embraced, cried, touched each other's faces in wonder. But beneath the emotion lay the enormous question: what had happened on that autumn day, and in all the days since? When they had collected themselves enough to talk, Ethan, still Lucas to his parents, began his extraordinary story. "I remember that day clearly," he started, his voice carrying the polished cadence of an educated East Coast businessman, yet with occasional hints of his childhood accent. "I was exploring near the creek, looking for fossils. Max was with me. I heard someone calling my name, not shouting, just conversational, like they knew me.
He described looking up to see a well-dressed man standing at the edge of the trees.
The man had introduced himself as Professor Richard Whitman from the Denver Science Institute, explaining that he'd seen Lucas's science fair project on simple machines at the regional competition months earlier. He told me he was scouting for gifted children for a special educational program, Ethan continued. He seemed to know everything about me, my interest in engineering, my grades, even the books I'd checked out from the library. 9-year-old Lucas had been flattered by the attention from this impressive adult who took his intellectual interests seriously. The man had shown him a brochure for what looked like an exclusive boarding school for gifted children. He said they had laboratories, advanced computing systems, engineering workshops, everything I dreamed about but could never access in Silver Creek, Ethan explained. He offered to show me some materials in his car, which was parked on the service road behind the Johnson property. It was a decision that would change everything, the moment Lucas followed the man to his vehicle. What he didn't know was that Professor Whitman was actually Gerald Blake, a wealthy financier with questionable ethics but a genuine eye for untapped potential. He offered me a drink, just water, but it was drugged, Ethan continued, his voice clinical now, detached, as if telling someone else's story. I remember feeling dizzy and then nothing until I woke up hours later in a moving car. Anna made a small, broken sound. David's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. What followed was a carefully orchestrated abduction disguised as an educational opportunity. Gerald Blake had indeed recognized extraordinary potential in Lucas, not just intelligence, but a particular aptitude for pattern recognition and systems thinking that the financier believed could be cultivated into financial genius. He took me to a private estate in Montana, Ethan explained, isolated, secure, with other children he'd collected in similar ways. There were 5 of us altogether, each selected for different cognitive abilities. The school was real in the sense that it provided intensive education, but its purpose was not altruistic. Gerald Blake was creating his own cadre of financial prodigies, children whose natural abilities he could shape and eventually exploit for market advantage. He took me to a private estate in Montana, Ethan explained, isolated, secure, with other children he'd collected in similar ways. There were 5 of us altogether, each selected for different cognitive abilities. The school was real in the sense that it provided intensive education, but its purpose was not altruistic. Gerald Blake was creating his own cadre of financial prodigies, children whose natural abilities he could shape and eventually exploit for market advantage. The first year, I tried to escape twice, Ethan said. After the second attempt, he showed me newspaper articles about my disappearance. He said if I tried again, he'd make sure my parents had an accident. I was 9 years old. I believed him. Over time, Stockholm Syndrome and pragmatism set in. Lucas, renamed Ethan after Gerald Blake's deceased son, began to excel in the specialized education provided. By 13, he was analyzing market trends. By 16, he was developing trading algorithms that consistently outperformed standard models. He wasn't cruel, exactly, Ethan said, struggling to characterize his captor. He provided everything except freedom, the best teachers, technology, opportunities to apply what we learned. In his twisted way, he believed he was salvaging potential that would otherwise be wasted. The other children had similar stories, all gifted, all taken from circumstances where their disappearances could be explained as tragic accidents or runaways. All renamed, all gradually molded into Gerald Blake's vision. "What about Max?" David asked suddenly. "Your dog was found miles away, weeks later." A shadow crossed Ethan's face. Gerald had his men release Max far from Silver Creek, hoping he wouldn't find his way back and lead anyone to where I'd been taken. I'm glad he survived. I missed him terribly. The turning point came when Ethan was 20. Gerald Blake suffered a massive stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed and cognitively impaired. The empire he had built, both legitimate and shadow, began to fracture without his controlling hand. The staff didn't know what to do with us, Ethan explained. We weren't prisoners exactly, but we weren't free either. Most scattered, taking what resources they could. Ethan, however, saw opportunity. With Gerald Blake incapacitated, he gained access to accounts and records previously hidden from him. He discovered that his education had been generating millions in profits that Gerald had been secretly accumulating. I made a decision, Ethan said, meeting his parents' gaze directly. I could have walked away, tried to rebuild some version of my old life, but I'd been gone 11 years by then. I barely remembered being Lucas Carter, and I saw a chance to take control of what Gerald had built, to use it for something better. Using the financial acumen Gerald had forced him to develop, Ethan legally maneuvered himself into control of key aspects of the Blake financial empire. He established his own identity, complete with backdated records and credentials. By 23, he had founded Blake Investments, named with deliberate irony after the man who had stolen his childhood. The first property I purchased was the Johnson land, he said quietly. I don't know why exactly. Maybe to own the place where my life changed. Maybe as a connection to Silver Creek I wasn't ready to acknowledge even to myself. As Ethan's company flourished, he began using his resources to quietly investigate the other children Gerald had taken. 2 had died over the years, one by suicide, another in a car accident that Ethan suspected wasn't accidental. The remaining 2 had established new identities like himself, though without his financial success. I've been supporting them, he said, helping them build lives, get therapy, find some kind of stability. Throughout his rise in the financial world, Ethan had maintained his carefully constructed identity, but fragments of Lucas occasionally surfaced, memories of his parents, of Max, of the red Schwinn bicycle with cards in the spokes. I started following your lives from a distance, he admitted. I knew you'd separated, knew about Mom's promotion at the hospital, Dad's retirement. I even anonymously attended Max's funeral, stood at the back, left before anyone noticed. Why didn't you come back sooner? Anna asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken throughout the conversation. Ethan was silent for a long moment. Fear, at first, he finally said. Fear of Gerald, even after his stroke. Then fear of disrupting the life I'd built. And, eventually, shame. Shame that I'd succeeded because of what happened to me, that I'd used the tools my captor gave me instead of rejecting them. He looked down at his hands, manicured, bearing an expensive watch, so different from the dirt-smudged fingers that had once collected rocks by the creek. And I was angry, he continued, his voice lower. Angry that no one had protected me, that Gerald Blake had been able to simply take me in broad daylight, that the world had moved on without Lucas Carter. David leaned forward. We never moved on, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not a single day passed that we didn't look for you, hope for you, grieve for you. Ethan nodded, accepting this truth. I know that now. I think I always knew it, somewhere beneath all the layers I built to survive. The conversation continued for hours as they began the delicate process of reconnecting, 3 people shaped by the same tragedy but who had experienced it from vastly different perspectives. They shared meals, looked at photographs, gradually rediscovering each other. By evening, Anna asked the question that had been troubling her. What happens now, Lucas, Ethan? Do you return to your life in New York? Do we just visit occasionally? Ethan considered this carefully. My life is in New York, he acknowledged. Blake Investments employs hundreds of people. I have responsibilities I can't simply abandon. Their faces fell, but he continued.
But Silver Creek is only a short flight away. I've already purchased a property near town, a place where we can spend time together, where you could live if you wanted, and my company is opening a research division in Denver. I'll be here regularly. And the world, David asked, will you tell them who you really are? This was perhaps the most complex question. The revelation that Ethan Blake was actually Lucas Carter would create a media frenzy, potentially destabilizing his company and certainly ending the privacy he valued. Selectively, Ethan decided. The authorities need to know the full story. About Gerald, about the other children. The public can know I was separated from my family and have reunited with them. The details, those belong to us. As night fell over the mountain lodge, the three Carters, for Ethan would always be a Carter beneath the Blake identity he had constructed, sat together watching the snow fall outside. 21 years of separation could not be bridged in a single day, but they had begun the process. In the weeks that followed, the story of Lucas Carter's return captured national attention, though, as planned, many details remained private. The official narrative was that Lucas had been taken for a specialized educational program under false pretenses, eventually establishing his own identity when he came of age. Gerald Blake, now in a nursing facility and unable to communicate, was identified as the perpetrator, though his motives were characterized as misguided rather than malicious. Ethan established the Carter Foundation, dedicated to finding missing children and supporting families affected by abductions. Using facial recognition technology and financial forensics, tools he knew intimately, the foundation developed new methods for tracking both victims and perpetrators across decades. For Anna and David, the adjustment was profound but healing. They relocated to the property Ethan had purchased near Silver Creek, a comfortable home with separate wings that allowed each parent independence while keeping them close to each other and to their son when he visited. The citizens of Silver Creek, who had carried Lucas's disappearance as a communal wound for 2 decades, embraced the miracle of his return. Officer Rankin, now retired, wept openly when he met Ethan, seeing in the confident financer echoes of the curious boy who had once shown him rocks collected from the creek bed. Mark Stevens, whose persistence had finally solved the case, was hired as the chief investigator for the Carter Foundation, his methodical approach perfectly suited to the Foundation's mission of finding long-missing children. And Ethan himself began the complex process of integrating his 2 identities, the Lucas he had been and the Ethan he had become. He started therapy to process the trauma of his abduction and the complicated relationship with his captor. He reconnected with childhood friends, now adults with families of their own. He visited Max's grave beneath the climbing tree and placed the compass charm there as a symbol of having finally found his way home. 1 year after the reunion, Ethan invited his parents to New York, showing them the world he had built. They attended the opening of a new Blake Investments headquarters, a building whose engineering incorporated principles Lucas had been fascinated by as a child. "You did become an engineer after all," Anna observed as Ethan explained the building's innovative structural design, "just not in the way we expected." "Life rarely follows the path we imagine," Ethan replied, his arm around his mother's shoulders. "But sometimes it leads us back to where we belong." The story of Lucas Carter and Ethan Blake would always defy simple categorization. It was a tragedy and a triumph, a loss and a finding, an ending and a beginning.
Most importantly, it was a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, resilience and hope can forge unexpected paths forward, and that sometimes, after decades of silence, the missing pieces of our lives can find their way home. For the Carter family, reunited against impossible odds, the journey was just beginning. There would be difficult conversations, painful memories, and the ongoing work of building relationships across the chasm of lost years. But there would also be joy, discovery, and the profound gift of a second chance that so many families of missing children never receive. In Silver Creek, the story of Lucas Carter's disappearance and return became more than local lore. It became a testament to the endurance of love and the possibility of miracles in a world that often seems devoid of both. And for anyone who had ever lost someone, it offered the most precious commodity of all, hope that even after decades, reunion remains possible. As Ethan Blake stood between his parents on the observation deck of his new building, looking out over the Manhattan skyline, he felt the compass charm he now wore around his neck, a replica of the one buried with Max. After 21 years of being lost, Lucas Carter had finally found his way home, bringing with him the strength, wisdom, and resources that only his extraordinary journey could have provided. The red Schwinn bicycle with cards in the spokes was long gone, but the curious, determined spirit of the boy who once rode it lived on in the man who had overcome the unimaginable to build a bridge between his past and future, and in doing so had transformed a story of disappearance into one of triumphant return.